Yes, I am an American journalist, and I write mostly about agriculture and the environment, and I've been living in Senegal for the last decade. Yeah, so Slaves or Peanuts is a work of popular history. It is sort of set against the background of the mid-19th century as peanuts start to become a commercial crop in West Africa. And it basically tells the interwoven narratives of three different characters. One is the peanut itself. Another is a Protestant missionary from Sierra Leone who establishes a refuge for runaway slaves. And the third is Lat Jor, who was sort of maybe one of the most well-known Senegalese heroes and was the leader of Kajor, the Damel. And they're all sort of wrapped together, they're all sort of entwined through a story of peanuts, of slavery, and colonialism. So as the peanut starts to become a commercial crop in the mid-19th century, the French especially are interested in getting more peanuts, and they're asking the people, mostly in this part of the coast, so Senegal up to Guinea, even parts of Sierra Leone, to put more land into production. But there's not enough labor, and so there are already kind of markets still for enslaved people in the interior, and there's of course a lot of upheaval, which is related also to the conquest, but also to the transatlantic slave trade, and maybe just also to regular sort of shifts. So those people who become enslaved because of war mostly, kind of find themselves, brought to the peanut growing land. So there's a relationship to the demand for labor in the kind of this part of Senegal and the Gambia and Guinea and parts of Sierra Leone, and which become a kind of market for the enslaved people. Yeah, a lot of people ask me this question. It's not direct. I came to Senegal many years ago to study food security and to write about food security in the region. And of course, Senegal has its main sort of crop in the rural economy is peanuts, and I knew that sort of coming in. And I started to spend a lot of time in the peanut basin in the Saloum, around Kaolack, between sort of Kaolack and Nioro. And I just remember having an interaction once when I was there that kind of struck me that this farming collective, they were starting to grow high-value vegetable crops and formed a collective. And the person who I thought was the best situated to be their president, and most of the people I knew who thought the same way, but this man was excluded because he was descended from enslaved people. And it sort of struck me at the time, and I recount this story in the preface, but that started me down a kind of rabbit hole, I guess, that I was trying to understand what is the impact of enslavement in this part of the world, and to also try to understand its connections to the broader sort of global system, not just the transatlantic slave trade, but to global trade, to colonialism, to all of those things. But I think this story is, of course, especially resonant for me because I am myself descended from enslaved people, but who were enslaved in America. So I had a kind of thought experiment, I think, almost sort of thinking about the connections between myself and the people who were here. Very much. It's true that, I could have called it Enslaved for Peanuts, but it's a little bit less catchy, I think, the book. But yeah, I mean, as a rule, of course, it's yet people are not, well, let's backtrack. Of course, there are many different ways we can understand slavery. The way that that slavery is lived in some societies imposes this kind of identification on them, slave, right? But of course, all people are enslaved at some critical moment, and that enslavement then, at least here, sometimes like perpetuated itself. Yeah, so Walter Taylor, who's the man you're speaking about, who was a Protestant missionary from Sierra Leone, naturalized French citizen later in his life. I learned about him actually just I was reading. He was not in the original proposal for the book, which surprises a lot of people because he's very much central to the book. But I was reading some other books about Saint Louis in the 19th century, and I came across this sort of small note that there was this Protestant missionary from Sierra Leone, and it just kind of, it moved throughout my mind, this idea. And, the decision to focus a little bit on Walter Taylor's, his activities, especially this refuge for runaway slaves, was also just because the idea of having a refuge for runaway slaves on the African continent. It felt very much like a kind of a story that felt really similar to an American story of slavery, as a kind of underground railroad or something like that, right? So there was initially that kind of novelty for me that kind of led me to want to learn more about what was this refuge and who was this person. And the more I uncovered, the more I thought, wow, Walter Taylor has such an interesting story because his own background is that his parents had been saved from slave ships and resettled in Sierra Leone. And he had this understanding about how people are creating community, even through their hardships. So the community he grew up in was full of people with similar experiences. So was full of people who had been likewise traumatized by some form of enslavement for some period of time, who knows how much time, and then resettled together and sharing the same language, sharing some religious practices and cultural practices. And I thought he must have seen that as a force. But at the same time, Walter Taylor, you see throughout the book, is also a kind of tool of colonialism, right, in assimilation. He's working very much to help. Well, he would say help to. Well, yeah. I mean, of course, he's helping, right? He's helping many of these fugitives or the runaways who are looking for their freedom. He's helping them get access to jobs, to education, to opportunities. But at the same time, he's also trying to convert them to Protestant Christianity. So there's a complexity in the sort of layers of how we can understand Walter Taylor. There are some relationships that still kind of bear the hallmarks or the traces, the kind of scars, let's call them, of a system of enslavement here in Senegal. Like I would be hesitant to point super directly at like particular instances, but there's a language people still use. There's a sort of a series of attitudes people still have, so there's still a conversation about people being descended from enslaved people, and that means, like, on some level they're not worthy to like be in leadership positions, or they're not worthy to be like to be an imam, or they're not worthy to marry your daughter or whatever, so there's still that conversation happening in society. The book is about not just the system of enslavement, say like in Senegal or the greater sort of Senegambia region, but it's also about like the economic incentives that come from the exterior that support this system, even though it purports to try to undercut it, right? So that's, the book is fundamentally about that kind of, like a kind of global hypocrisy, you know. I mean, I can't say, you know, I'm a writer. I haven't been doing, making sort of, let's call it like recommendations to groups. But I would, you know, say that doing that work of uncovering our links between the demands for certain materials that we have, whether they're like, you know, super rare metals or something as banal as a peanut, and how that demand sometimes supports a system of exploitation and unfree labor, or, you know, yeah, maybe sometimes even enslavement itself, to kind of be more critical. Just uncovering that. I think that uncovering and kind of connecting as clearly as possible. You know, my other goal in writing this book, which might be interesting, and my other goal in writing this book was to kind of create, as I've explained, there are these characters, and even the peanut itself are super complicated. They're both positive and negatives for all of them. So Walter Taylor is both, you know, a person who's helping the enslaved, but he's also kind of, you know, maybe feeding them into the yawning maw of assimilation, of French assimilation. You know, Jori is a very difficult character to kind of pin down, right? He emerges at the end of the book as almost a hero, even though, of course, he has many other flaws. And the peanut itself is supporting slavery, but of course, it's still a crop that's integral to our lives today. So my goal was also to bring that complexity so we can hold all of the complexity of history, of African history, to not just write, you know, either heroes or villains, but to bring a whole understanding to African history, which I think has been missing sometimes. Yeah, my last word is that bringing complex history to a broader audience, and bringing that complexity to the story of Africa as well, just in general, which I think has, you know, there's a tendency to kind of silo our conversations about African history, like as you said, just in a conversation about enslavement and colonialism. And my book is about both, but it's about more than that. It's trying to bring a multiplicity of voices, of storytelling techniques. You know, I use archives, I use fables, I use oral histories. I just bring as many voices and as many kind of complicated characters to life.